For a long time now, there's been this kind of systematic, persistent decline in the American man, right? And maybe it's happening around the world too, but we live in America. This is my perception of stuff. And I wanted to pull some data and bring those feelings to light in a more quantitative way. And some of the stats are crazy, right? So I think when we talk about being a man, one of the things people most associate with it is testosterone, right? Mm-hmm. Like T levels.
Where are we at?
All-time else.
All-time lows.
It's pretty crazy. I mean, in just the last 20 years, the average T levels in young adult men are down 25%. This is just in the
what the hell
2000s. And I researched, when I was researching, I found a study from the early 90s that was griping about how T levels have been falling 1% a year since the late 70s. So
all these products that exist that never existed, I'm getting targeted as well. I'm like, you want to increase your testosterone and all these things? I see them everywhere.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Sperm counts are down 60% since the 70s.
Damn.
Which is kind of crazy. But perhaps even worse is some like the social stuff. Did you know men now make up just 40% of college students?
I think we might have mentioned that before in a past podcast, that like women are the majority of college.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. It just what are you describing with that statistic? I suppose like
I think it's a bad. If half the population is men and half the population is women, but then college looks like China, but like in
terms of
reverse.
Population mix, yeah.
Maybe those men aren't going to college. Maybe they're going to study a trade. I think that's fine.
With Eric, this might be an anomaly issue of college.
Keep going.
Let's just rattle off all the stats, and then you can think
about
it. Median wages for men have declined since 1990 in real terms. Last year, for the first year ever, more men aged 18 to 34 live with their parents than with romantic partners.
Is that all Italians or just any?
Deaths of despair from drug overdoses, alcohol, suicide are up as much as 380% a year in the last few years, depending on the specific age cohorts. And even in the best age cohorts, they're still up 50%. 90% of prison inmates are men. Women outnumber men in college, yes, but they also far outnumber them in graduate school, law school, and even medical school now. It just seems like everywhere you look, men are objectively on the decline. I'm curious if you guys agree with this, if you have any hypotheses as to why this is happening.
I don't know if this is directly correlated to what you want, but something that I've mentioned before that might be another opening to just kind of leave out there is that I think enough people don't acknowledge the fact that being a man is very hard. And there's a lot of discrepancies and differences between the genders that most people don't want to sit and discuss, because we've been in a world over the last 10 to 20 years in particular where we want to help women rise to the level of equality that men have had for ever, literally forever. And so in order to do so, does a man need to lower his own social status? I don't think so. I think that that's the approach that we've taken. And the part that we haven't done a good enough job of is actually acknowledging how difficult it is, even if we wanted to be equal, even if we wanted the same level of opportunity, that actually, no matter what, unless we literally became so similar in our social status and in our lifestyles that the only thing that differentiated us was our genitals, then you would get to a place where you could say, okay, being a man is no harder than it is to be a woman. That means that the same number of men should enter the military as women. That means that homelessness should be equal men and women. That means that every area of life, suicide should be equal men and women. Because the reality is that being a man is very hard. And I think the reason that it is very hard is because forever, men have been the providers. And that role of provider comes with a high level of risk and responsibility of being out in the world, killing, getting it, whether it be money or food or success, in order to provide. And that aspect of life in which you have to go out and become as educated as possible, as rich as possible, as successful as possible, and put yourself out there to even go and say, if there's a war, I'm going to be the one to step up and protect my women and children, is massive.
You use the term killing it. And like, I mean, literally killing it. Like is typically one gender that's going out and fighting the war, like
Correct.
literally killing it.
Correct.
And that
there is not enough recognition of these facts to start the conversation. I know this is not meant to be a gender episode. We'll do that one day as well. But what I really am saying is, like, if we are going to discuss masculinity at all, it's important to just recognize that masculinity and being a man in this world is challenging. It is hard. This is a game of hierarchy. This is a game of social status. This is a game of alpha wolves and monkeys and apes all competing to climb and ascend the ladder. So let's start with those facts, because that is what is being eradicated from society as a whole, is like this need to climb the ranks and be better, and competition as a whole is what I think is one aspect of things that is like getting shut down.
I like where you both went there. I like where you both went there. I mean, on the one hand, you have the statistics of like T levels dropping over decades, and I don't have an answer for that right off the top of my head. But what I do know is like how we all grew up as men, and let me just set the record straight. It's not easy being a woman either, right? Both genders have their own set of struggles, and I think what you're alluding to is that like we're only catering to the women's struggle on like a cultural basis is what I'm hearing, and I think that's actually mostly true actually. Like and where I stand on that is like nature is fucking brutal. Like, you follow like Instagram, like nature is metal. Like you see the predator killing the prey, and it's like it's fucking alarming to watch. And you watch that with your eyes within our civilization. You're just like, oh my God, like how can this happen? And you're like, but this is actually what the world is. Mm-hmm. So when I think of that and I think of masculinity, it's like, well, how we grew up as men was a little bit more nature is metal kind of vibe, where it's like girls have females have it tough now because like they're fighting against a system that was sort of against them for decades, here in the United States, but even more so abroad. And, what we deal with that I think is overlooked is that, like, when you're a young man, like there is a hierarchy in a very physical sense.
It's on the playground.
On the playground, like
day one.
Like you get your hierarchy sorted physically.
Yep.
And like women don't appreciate that, like, if you're not like the biggest guy on the playground, like you're getting tossed, you're getting beat up, and you got to figure out a way to deal with that physically.
Right.
And like that doesn't get appreciated. And like if a woman were to get like physically,
sure it does. They're attracted to the one that's
the biggest,
but the one that's somehow winning the playground.
Right.
Yeah.
But even then, it's like now that guy's getting admonished for being like the bully. But like, how we grew up, it's like, you better learn to be funny. You better learn to be amicable. You better learn to like get along with people. You better learn to like use your wits about you to either not get beat up, or you got to be bigger than the other guy.
Right.
And that's interesting. Like I think that is getting lost in the sauce somewhere.
Does everybody here like just agree with the basic premise that men in America are in decline?
I don't know what that quite means. Go ahead.
Well, I think your stats pointed out some good metrics to measure it by. I think that makes sense. I think you could also try to measure it on like a social, cultural basis. I definitely think there's definitely a bias towards moving women up and pushing men down by the premise that, well, men, maybe in particular white men, have had some kind of like a easy path to this place, and we need to kind of move the power structures to make it equal opportunity. So I think by those two, like, and I don't know what metrics you'd use to describe that, but I think culturally, I think I feel like most people could come to the agreement that like that's the trend. Agree.
And I think like on some of the stats you mentioned, like college, like wages, like those could be a function of just additional competition coming into the market. Like women are now becoming, partners in the workplace and partners in like higher education, and that brings on extra competition. So like men could suffer just based on competition alone, which is fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think I take a different view on it than Armand and Eric. Like you guys were talking about how difficult it is and the environment that men grow up in. And I think you can make a similar argument for both genders. So like, I don't know if that's like a contributing factor to potential decline, but I did find something that I'll put it as like a working thesis, is that, you know, when it comes to men and the declining masculinity, there has been a decrease in fathers in the household. And I think all of you grew up with your father in the household, at least to a certain extent.
Yep.
Is that true?
Yep.
To a certain age? Mine
Yeah.
was like till like 13 or so.
Like 7.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a little mix there, but I think I found a Pew Research study that said close to 25% of households are single parent. Now, they didn't say whether it was male or female, but like we know that the rise of like fatherless homes is happening. And in 1960, that was 9%. So you're talking like a threefold increase over a series of decades of fathers that are not in the household. And I think, you know, an absence of masculinity comes from an absence of masculinity.
100%.
You know, early on in childhood, to maybe even teach those things. Like, your job is to be accountable to yourself.
You
Your
either
job
won't
is to
learn
provide.
it, or you'll go learn a bad version of it on the street.
Right. Exactly. And maybe, you know, if there's not a strong father figure in place, you know, you might learn it from social media.
Yeah.
Or what's taught in school.
Or your mother.
Right. Or your mother, which
And she'll do the best version she can.
which is great, because like a mother, you know, a mother's embrace provides, you know, comfort, but like a father's embrace is supposed to provide confidence. Like when your father like approves, it gives you confidence. And when a mother approves, it's more like caring and love.
Yeah,
and
look,
I think that maybe
I feel like
missing.
this is such a stereotype, but like I feel like if you went home as a kid and you told your mom you got in a fight and you got beat up, your mom would be like, you know, good, stay away from that bully. And your dad might be like, yo, next time, like, knock him back.
Yeah. Did you win?
Or similarly,
Yeah.
I got straight A's, and
Right.
the mother again is like comforting, loving, you know, great job. But then, you know, a father's approval, you know, potentially gives confidence. At least in my case, most certainly. And so I think that that's important, and that's been missing. And you know, the timelines kind of match up when you think about some of the metrics that Stephen talks about. So I think that, and I think one part of being masculine is being a good father. Like, none of us have kids yet, but you know, that is part of masculinity, is like being a present, proactive father and doing a good job of it. And I think the lack of that has created some downsides.
What about like the cultural perspective? You know, like how people view masculinity. I feel like even that is on a decline, where people like look at masculinity as sort of a negative.
Yeah, I love where you're going. For my brain, this is such a big topic that I almost feel like if we could parse it out a little bit, it would help me. Because, like, for example, the testosterone thing with masculinity for me feels like a massive thing that we could go into, and we could look at all of the lifestyle habits, nutrition, mindset habits, psychological changes that have taken place over the last fucking 50 years even, and how those have changed and are in decline. And we probably would never be able to segment out what really is the culprit here. It's probably a compilation of all those things. But the cultural aspect, and the only reason I brought up the whole like being a man is hard thing, is just because I don't hear that a lot. I don't hear that enough. What we do hear is that, and where I'm very sympathetic is that, you know, I grew up with a single mom. I have so much compassion toward women. I've grown up in a place where it's like respect women equality. I have a very strong mother who's extremely successful. And so I've learned that part. What I did not see coming is the change that has taken place in masculinity. And it's actually kind of happened right before our eyes over the last 10 years while we've been men. And what I've seen take place is like, very simple. Psychologically, in order for women to be equal to men, it comes as a cost to men. That's the simplest version of what I see. It's like, okay, the patriarchy, that's the problem. That's who rules. Like, that's who has been in charge. That's who is taking from us. That's who's mistreating us. I'm speaking like on behalf of women and society at large. And these fucking people have been in charge of every single industry, every single institution. They don't let us climb up. They don't give us the equal opportunity that we deserve. And therefore, we need to fight. We need to strengthen our voices. We need to rise up. We need to point out the flaws in men. We need to point out the things that are toxic in the systems that we see. And in order to do so, it's almost like a machine gun ripping off the heads of every single person, rather than a sniper to go in and say, okay, this is a problem specifically right here with you and your behavior. I am not okay with that. And that's a line. And that would be good, because then we would actually have society being like a feedback loop of like, that's not good behavior. That's toxic. Let's get rid of that specifically. But what we've done instead is we've taken a sledgehammer and we've reduced all masculinity down to nothing. It's just like everything you do is inherently wrong. It's kind of like our racism episode. It's like white guilt. It's masculine guilt. It's masculine guilt to me. I feel like it's gotten to a place where most of the things that made us who we are admonished by society as a whole, in particular by certain types of women, certain types of people in the feminist movement. And it has gone from a place where it was extremely healthy and needed because it was nothing. There was no level of camaraderie and connection, and like there was no power, to all of a sudden just becoming this overpowering movement of like everything the other gender does is wrong and broken. And I'll kind of end this point with this quote. Masculinity isn't toxic. It's men who aren't masculine who are toxic. Weak little men use and abuse women instead of protecting and loving them. Our society is suffering from a shortage of real masculinity, and it actually brings great harm to women and children. The role of the male in so many ways, and what we do best and want more than anything that is in our fucking loins, is to protect, to serve, to honor, to go and kill and provide. And we're no longer being propped up and admired to do so. And it's reducing our testosterone probably as a result of that, because we're not being admired for it at all anymore. Yeah. That and not doing enough deadlifts.
Yeah. I mean,